Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. Welcome to the At-Large Capacity Building webinar, Giving Better Presentations Online and Forming Old Habits in the New Reality, taking place on Monday, the 21st of September, 2020 at 1900 UTC. We will not be doing a roll call as this is a webinar. However, the attendees will be noted from both the Zoom room and the bridge connections. We do have Spanish and French interpretation on this call. Our Spanish interpreters for today are Claudia and Marina, and our French interpreters are Jacques and Claire. We also have real-time transcribing on the call, and we will put the link in the chat in a minute so you guys can follow along. A friendly reminder to please keep your lines muted when not speaking to prevent any background noise, and to please state your name when taking the floor so that the interpreters can identify you on the other language channels. Thank you very much, and with this, I turn the call over to you, Jonathan. Jonathan, if you're speaking, you're on mute.
I was just testing you. Thanks everyone for coming out to participate in this webinar. It's a little bit different than a lot of the ones that we've done in that it's more focused on process and talking about how we might give better, more effective presentations on our Zoom calls that we find ourselves on these days. It's interesting because in a very short period of time, you know, presentations have gone from something that looks like this to something that looks like this, right? And so that's what we want to try and talk about, because the implications of this are pretty important. A lot of the presenters have gotten their own sort of fatigue from this whole pandemic, but it's important to remember that the people we're trying to reach are having as many challenges as we are, whether it's staying awake in different time zones, whether it's eye fatigue, whether it's distractions like their cat walking across their keyboard, etc. Those people are having just as much difficulty as we are. And if we want to reach people, whether it's to give them a new perspective or to teach something, etc., finding a way to give a little bit more dynamic presentation is going to be critical. We can't just keep going on as we have been in terms of how we're just sort of narrating our slides. So we're going to talk about this, and we're going to divide this up into, trying to keep track of my screen here a little bit. We're going to divide this up into a number of different sections. So the first section is going to be just talking about how presentations could be better. And then we'll talk a little bit about how we will go about presenting those presentations. And then we'll talk about some tools and technologies that will help. I mean, if you think about it, a presentation is a little bit like a documentary film, right? So if we take Ken Burns, who's a famous documentarian who's created many Emmy Award-winning documentaries for television, the first of which was called Civil War. And it's basically just putting voice and pictures together to create these narrations. So if I play a little clip from this, hopefully you can hear it.
By the summer of 1861, Wilmer McLean had had enough. Two great armies were converging on his farm. What would be the first major battle of the Civil War, Bull Run, or Manassas as the Confederates called it, would soon rage across the aging Virginian's farm, the Union shell going so far as to explode in the summer kitchen.
So that's how the Civil War documentary began. Now imagine if it looked a little bit more like this, right? So the way the Civil War started, it was in the summer of 1861 at the Battle of Bull Run. It was fought in Manassas, Virginia. It was fought on the property of Wilmer McLean. Fun fact, the war ended on Wilmer McLean's property that he moved to in order to try and avoid the war. So the Civil War was capped front and back by Wilmer McLean's property. So I don't think that if this is the documentary that Ken Burns had delivered to PBS, that we all would have stayed glued to our televisions for hours upon hours to learn about the Civil War. And yet that's what we're asking of our audiences in the ICANN context. As the ICANN 69 meeting is approaching us, we're again facing the specter of 40 hours of Zoom meetings in which that look quite a bit like this slide. So the idea is to see if we can find a way around that and get a little bit further along. There's another award-winning documentary called An Inconvenient Truth, which is basically Al Gore running a keynote presentation, Apple keynote presentation. So it can be done. If Al Gore can keep us entertained for 90 minutes, then you and I should definitely be capable of doing it. So again, the fact that we're using slides doesn't mean that our presentations have to be boring. So we're going to talk first a little bit about presentation design. And the first thing to remember when designing your presentations is that they're meant to be an accessory to your presentation, not the presentation itself. People have come to see you speak, not see some member of the ICANN staff flip through your slides. And that's the thing that you have to keep in mind. I'm going to load you up with a lot of different sort of tips and techniques, et cetera, around public speaking, none of which will really be new. We'll just be looking at how to apply them to a Zoom environment. But the truth of the matter is, if you hold on to that one fact, that they're there to see you and not your slides, that will make all the difference. So we're going to talk a little bit about presentation design. We're going to talk a little bit about the technologies that could be used to make it go easier, and a little bit about how you might go about presenting to make your presentation a little bit more effective. The first thing that you want to think about when designing your slides is to limit the number of words that are on your presentations. We've all fallen into the habit of crowding all kinds of text into the slides that we present during our Zoom meetings in the ICANN community. And there's a lot of difficulties associated with this. One of the difficulties is something called subvocalization, which basically is the phenomena whereby people are reading the slides to themselves while you're trying to talk at the same time. So you end up with a situation where there's actually a clash of voices going on in the head of your audience, which isn't what you're after. So if we think about what that looks like, let me share screen again. So we want to remember that the slides are meant to be your accessory and not that you are the accessory to your slides. So this is a little bit about what a slide might sound like to an audience member when you have a lot of text on top of it.
Since 2000, we've seen a dramatic increase in mobile payment systems, particularly in regions where banking is less available. In the last 5 years alone, we've seen a 120%.
We've seen a 20% increase in the use of
Double
double pay and red delicious in just the last 5 years.
Mobile payments, it's imperative
to make sure that we maintain innovation friendly environment while preserving some kind of regulatory safety. So that's what's going on when you have a slide full of text and you're essentially reading that text or talking about that text. Your audience is attempting to read it aloud to themselves, basically, and you're simply talking over them. So one of the reasons that I think this happens is because we jump into PowerPoint in order to design our presentation in the first place. We build our outline inside of PowerPoint. In fact, the outliner is one of the features of PowerPoint. People jump into the outliner and start dumping their notes into PowerPoint. One of the interesting things about this phenomena is that we don't do it if we don't intend to use slides for our presentation. If we're doing a presentation without slides, we get out a piece of paper and we write down notes about what it is that we want to try and say. Maybe we make a little remarks about jokes we might make or a metaphor that we might use, etc. But we're simply doing it with a piece of paper. It's only when it's our intention to use slides that we use presentation software as our speech writing tool. So what I want to recommend is that you do the same thing here. Even when you intend to use slides, get out a piece of paper first and write your speech, write your overall presentation, the points that you want to make, etc. Maybe making some notes about the visuals that might help drive that presentation along. But ultimately, don't get into PowerPoint or Keynote or Google Slides until after you've written your speech. Because then you'll continue to think about your speech as the real entity and the slides as really just being an accessory to that presentation that you're trying to give. I hope that makes sense. Now, at the same time, when I say don't fill your slides with text, I also want to say that you can't afford to fill your slides with graphics either, unfortunately. So if I have a screen that looks like this, right, I have another problem that arises. And this is a phenomena called inattentive deafness. And this is basically a phenomena whereby if you put a complex visual in front of someone, in order to focus on it and understand what they're seeing, they'll tune out their audio senses, essentially becoming deaf. There's been a lot of tests of this, etc. So the next time that you're telling your teenager that they need to take out the trash while they're looking at their phone, they may not actually be ignoring you. They might literally not be able to hear you because of the complexity of the screen that they're looking at on their phone. So again, too complicated graphics, too much text, both lead to interference with what you're hearing. So if we think about what the audience is hearing when they're looking at a graphic like this, it sounds a little bit like this. Right? That's not much better either. It's just silence. There are some things that you can do to break up a complex graphic that allow you, to, for example, to use the annotation capabilities that are inside of Zoom, for example, in order to highlight things that are on the screen. You can break up the slide into multiple slides so that you're building up the image as you go, etc. There's plenty of tools for coming into your presentation and highlighting the thing that you're trying to demonstrate on the screen. Another thing you can do is build some small animations into your presentation so that, for example, I could start by just showing part of the presentation, and then when I got done discussing this piece of the Gantt chart, the complex Gantt chart, I could do a little bit of an animation to show more of the image on the screen. Just by moving a white rectangle on the screen, I can create a little bit more dynamism and allow you to focus your audience on the thing that you want them thinking about on the graphic. And we'll talk about some other tools. I'm trying to do this as much without third-party tools right now, but in the third section, we'll talk a little bit more about some of the tools that are available to help with these kinds of challenges. Just to give you a sense of how long I've been at this, I came across this recently. In 1994, I wrote a utility for PC Magazine, that's 26 years ago, that was for teachers and trainers to be able to draw on the screen while they were teaching different software and draw arrows and annotate the screen. So it's certainly not a new problem. It's something that we've all been struggling with for some time. The next thing I want to talk a little bit about is accessibility. We need to find a way to make our presentations as accessible to the greatest number of people possible. And so that means thinking about those things as you're designing your slides, as you're designing your presentation. If you have someone that is seeing impaired, for example, it becomes very important to design your slides in such a way that they're more easily seen on the screen. Even those of us that are in denial about the state of our vision would benefit from slides that were easier to see and that are high enough contrast to be visible on everyone's monitor, every broken monitor, every phone, etc. So one of the tools that's out there that's useful for managing the color scheme of your slides, if you will, is something called ColorSafe ColorSafe CO, that will allow you essentially to go in and specify what you want the background color of your slide to be. So let's say that you're using this kind of light blue color that that was sort of the slides that we got for ICANN 68. Once I've chosen a background, I can click on Generate Palette, and you can see the colors that might work that are sufficiently high in contrast for them to be visual, so that you can choose these colors, set them in PowerPoint, and make sure that you're creating a high enough contrast image so that it's as visible to as many people as possible that might be watching your presentation. So it's just, again, something to think about in terms of the accessibility of your presentation. Another aspect of accessibility sometimes is describing the images that are in your presentation. And sometimes that means actually describing them as you give your presentation, which can be difficult, but you can sort of make note of what it is that people are looking at so that those that are having trouble seeing them are able to understand what it is they're meant to see on the screen. There are tools inside of PowerPoint, though, that allow you to specify a description for the images that you're presenting in your slides, so that if somebody has a copy of the slides, which we usually do up on the wiki page, then they can go in and go through the slides along with you, and their screen readers, et cetera, will be able to look at these and have these descriptions read to them, so that they can see exactly what it is that they are meant to see on the screen. So if I click in there quickly, you can see this is the dialog box in PowerPoint. You right click on an image, you choose Edit Alt Text, and you can see here that you can design what text is behind an image so that a screen reader will be able to look at it later on. So that's another sort of important aspect of trying to make the slides that you're doing a little bit more accessible. I mean, normally I would also be talking about captioning and things like that so that people could more easily read what you're saying. But luckily we have real-time transcription in our presentations. And so you don't need to be trying to do captioning as well in your PowerPoints as you go along. But those are just some very basic principles associated with slide design. And what I wanted to do, I've been ignoring the chat and everything else, but I'd like to take a minute now and just open it up for questions. If you have questions about slide design before we move on to presenting itself, I'm happy to take your questions, and I will turn my participants window on, et cetera, so that I can see whose hand is up. Judith, you have a question, go ahead.
Yes, it's Judith Helsing for the record. I think those are, I love descriptions are helpful. I also wanted to remind people that, like you said, people with screen readers, People who are on the phone, they cannot see the image that's on the screen. So that's why it's important to have them have a copy of that image. And also, like, as Johnson said, to describe the image. And there's also a listing of what fonts are serif and non-serif. And I just learned this. Apparently, some fonts that are not serif, or one of them, are very difficult for people with some disabilities to focus on.
Thanks, Judith. It's actually the serif fonts, I think, that are harder for screen readers and those with impaired vision to look at. And so I think it's sans serif that you want to try to stick to.
I forget which one.
Okay.
But apparently, yeah, I never knew that either, but that's a simple thing to change.
It is. All right, thank you. Pablo, go ahead.
Thanks, Jonathan, and thank you so much for this presentation, which is much needed throughout all of the ICANN community. Thank you very much. I would like you to share some of the URLs for ColorSafe, and thank you so much for that information on the alt text, because as a matter of fact, I recently completed my doctoral dissertation, and I'm starting to prepare presentations in which I am forced to put a citation under many of the diagrams that I'm using. If I can avoid that, I can save more space on my slides and get this going. As a matter of fact, I would like to offline speak with you about other ideas. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. If anybody is working on taking their presentation up to the next level over the next couple of weeks, I'm happy to talk to you or look at what it is that you're trying to create. So let's see what we can do to make our presentations a little bit more dynamic. I see Eduardo is next. You might be on mute, Eduardo.
Now, can you hear me? I'm sorry.
Yes, now I can.
I noticed that in the ICANN meetings and everywhere else, people most of the time, they present the slides, but they don't show themselves. And I think, like you're doing today, that you're showing yourself and you're presenting the slide, it gives it a personal feeling, of who, the person that is giving it. So is it your recommendation also that we do that during presentations? So this is something that it doesn't matter.
I definitely recommend it because the presentation is about you and not about your slides. You should spend as much time as you can on screen and only switch to your slides when it makes sense to do so, because you want to make a point, illustrate something with a diagram or a graph or something of that sort. Zoom doesn't natively make it particularly easy to switch back and forth. So one of the things I'll be talking about are some tools in section 3 about how to make that more fluid and easier to do, in a Zoom presentation using what's known as virtual camera software, but we'll talk about that a little bit. But I highly recommend spending most of your time on camera. A lot of people don't realize it, but software like PowerPoint and Keynote, they all respond to the B key. And what the B key does in those packages is turn the screen black. And so the reason that feature exists is so that even people that are standing up in front of an audience with a big screen have the capacity to draw attention back to themselves when they're talking. So once the audience is done kind of looking at the diagram you've just shown, or the quote, or the punchline that you've put up on the slide, they often hit the B key, blacks out the screen, because that refocuses the audience on them as the speaker. And we don't need to black out the screen. It behooves us instead to switch back to the camera whenever we can, whenever we don't need them looking at the slides. There's scientific evidence that people trust more when they can see you. Again, from an accessibility standpoint, there are some people that can read lips, and so their ability to do that is a function of being able to see your face. So more face, less slides, Eduardo. Cheryl, go ahead.
Thanks, Jonathan. Cheryl, for the record, just very briefly, and putting on my, I can actually claim that I have qualifications in neurophysiology, so I'm going to use them now. It is definitely sans serif, as you said, Jonathan, that is easier for many people to read. As soon as you start putting little twiddly bits on the end, it can get very challenging in certain conditions, but also really come in behind the use of that colour safe or similar tools, that colorsafe.co tool, because there's also different colours. There was a question in chat about colour blindness. Well, that in itself is a huge thing because not all colour blindnesses are the same. And so using those tools to optimize the contrast in your colour choices is extremely handy. But I wanted to mention about alt text, and I'm a fan of that, believe me, a huge fan of it. It also allows you to do two things. It allows you to put some historical and specific annotation to where you've got it from information onto things as well. And we all too often find it very difficult to link back perhaps an artist to an image we're looking at, and we can take that alt text as a place and space to note those very important things. And also, even if you're using pictures that you may have created yourself, date them, author them. That's a great thing to have associated with an image, because these days we lose an awful lot of information. I have no idea how future historians are going to matter. But also from a presenter's point of view, describe what you have on the screen. I don't mean in gory detail, but as you can see in my amusing little cartoon here from, it shows that. And then if you're not able to visualize, then you've at least heard. Thank you.
Yes, Cheryl, all good points. There are images that are available under a Creative Commons license. And I will add some links to some of those kinds of sites in the wiki page. To answer the question that Pablo had at the beginning, I will put links to everything that I talk about back on the wiki page for this session, including a couple of articles about things like inattentive deafness and subvocalization, if you're interested in digging further into those principles and why having your audience read your slides at the same time as you is a bad thing, and why overly complex visuals can lead them to tune you out as a speaker. I'll put those things there as well. So I'll put links to all of these things. Again, what I was about to say though, before I skidded off the side there, is that there are Creative Commons licensed images that are available on the internet. There's a lot of them now, but some of them do require attribution for their use. So that's free to use, but you still need to let folks know where they came from. And so that's another important use, as Cheryl mentioned, for the alt text feature in PowerPoint, because we do make all of our presentations available. I mean, one of the ironies of the almost perpetual question, will the slides be available, is that it presupposes that the slides are somehow going to be a replacement for the talk. And if that's true, then you haven't done your job. But the slides still do provide an important document of the images that you used, how to describe them, and where they came from. Any other questions? I don't see any other hands up, so I might try to continue on then. So the next thing that I wanted to talk about a little bit is, if I can get my screen sharing working and things like that, is presentation delivery. So what is it that we can do? And this gets to Eduardo's question about the delivery of your presentation. And there's a number of different things to think about when delivering your presentation. And the first one that I was going to mention is be on camera. be on camera as much as you can, because people are there to see you speak, and they respond better to seeing you speak than they do to just looking at slides. So just having you hide behind your slides isn't the way to go. So there's some implications to that, obviously, right? One is that you might need to think a little bit again about some of the things you thought about when you were doing face-to-face presentations. We're all suffering from COVID-related haircuts and things like that, and we've all stopped wearing long pants. But the truth of the matter is, there's still a benefit to putting on a clean shirt, washing your hair, trimming your beard, etc. Whatever it is you do to make yourself presentable is still worth doing in this environment, now that you've all made the commitment to be on screen more and not just hide behind your slides. So those are some things to think about. I will, just for fun, share, you know, what I have looked like at some points during the, oh no, that's not what I meant to share, sorry. Oh, I think I have it here. There, this is what I've looked at times during the COVID crisis. And so this isn't who you want to see giving you a presentation about cybersecurity, for example. So ideally, you are trying to make yourself as presentable as you can as you give your presentation. Another thing that I'm going to mention is that if you can, I recommend standing while you give your presentation. Again, this is something that we do in the context of our face-to-face presentations more often than not. We've all heard about the health benefits of standing more while you're working, that sitting is the new smoking and things like that. But there's also scientific evidence at this point to suggest that we think better on our feet, that our cognitive skills are at their best when we're standing rather than when we're sitting. So we think best on our feet. And so if you can, if you're able, then stand while you're giving your presentation. And that's what I was going to share here quickly. I can share again. This is my little space where I'm giving this presentation. As you can see, I'm at a standing desk. I've got a light in front of me, et cetera. And so those are some of the, and then otherwise just a big mess on my desk. But I am standing right now as I talk to you. So there's, you want to stand while you're trying to give the presentation. You want to try to be on camera as much as possible. And so those are the things that we already know, in a sense, that we want to make the presentation about you as much as possible. And so that's one of the things that becomes important. And so the other aspect of this, though, is that you should try to drive your own presentation. And this might be one of the hardest things for people to sort of wrap their mind around, because we've become used to converting our slides to PowerPoint and giving them to staff, who in turn share their screen and advance our slides, so that we get in the habit of talking to our slides, not switching to our camera, telling them to switch, and oh, you went too far, no, can you go back, etc. Those are the kinds of conversations that we end up having during our live presentations. And that's just not ideal. What you want to do is drive your own slides, because it allows you to use animations, et cetera, in your slides that will better describe the things that you're showing or saying. It'll allow you to maintain a cadence for your presentation as well that you can't really when someone else is driving the presentation. If we go back to the inconvenient truth here with Al Gore, you'll notice down here in his hand a little slide clicker. So this is the former Vice President of the United States, a multimillionaire, and he's advancing his own slides in his presentation about climate change. So this is a technical presentation given by a guy who isn't known for his oratory, but he's advancing his own slides. And if we look, for example, at a Steve Jobs keynote, you know, one of the more famous sort of keynote presenters that has existed in history. And if you look in his hand, you'll see that he's got a little slide clicker as well. So they're using something like this, basically, to go back and forth into their slides. But you don't have to get a slide clicker to do that. Since you're sitting at your computer, you can hit the space bar, the arrow keys, et cetera, to advance your slides or to advance the animation as it goes through. And I highly recommend that you do that. You'll have control over the pacing of your presentation, the cadence of your presentation, and allow yourself to do more dynamic slides than you would be able to do if they're converted to PDFs and advanced by the staff. I don't know if the staff are thrilled about me saying this, but I think it's imperative that we start taking control of our own presentations within the ICANN context. The next thing that I want to talk about is, since you're going to be on camera, is that you should look at the camera. And that's another difficult problem that isn't new. If you go to a television station or something like that to give an interview, more often than not, there's something called a confidence monitor that's off to the side of the camera that allows you to see yourself. But the fact that it's off to the side means that you're kind of going like this the whole time, looking at yourself, and you end up looking shifty and untrustworthy as a result. And so what the Zoom equivalent of that has been is that we start going like this because we're trying to look at the other people in the meeting, we're trying to keep track of the chat, and it looks like we're almost like we're half asleep as we're talking because we're not looking at the camera. So as difficult as it is, ideally, your eyes are up and you're looking at the camera whenever you're speaking. If you need to look at your notes, look at them briefly, pause, come back to the camera, and then pick up where you left off with your speaking. So it takes practice because the camera is not a very warm and welcoming thing to stare at. But if the extent to which you can do that, the more intimacy you're actually going to create with the people that you're trying to reach in your presentation. You can get creative if you want to, for example, and hang some kind of a mirror over your webcam so that you can see yourself and look at yourself at the same time. There are YouTube videos for creating a teleprompter for $20 worth of materials, so that you could in fact even look at other people in the meeting at the same time that you're looking at the camera. But I would say that I think that doing that is critical to giving an effective presentation. If you're going to be on camera, look at the camera. And that is the final message that I want to give here, which is that you need to rehearse your presentation. To the extent possible. It doesn't mean get it memorized or anything like that, but the extent to which you can get yourself familiar with the things that you're going to say, the transitions you're going to make. Sometimes it's managing the technology, which I maybe haven't done enough of here because I'm trying to do it the hard way through Zoom. But rehearsal is important to your presentation. There's no question. So if I think about it, we've talked a little bit about slide design. We've talked a little bit about techniques you might want to use while presenting. It seems like a lot, and it might be a little bit overwhelming, and I get that. I guess I'd have you think of two things, though, as you remember this presentation. One of them is you don't have to do everything that we talked about. Try one or two of these things and see if they help improve your presentations or improve your confidence in your presentation. You don't have to do everything all at once. Whatever it is you're up for managing in the next couple of weeks, do that, try that. Feel free to talk to me about it if you have questions or challenges in trying to do it. But the other point that I want to make is that every presentation has an intention, an objective. It's to teach somebody something new. It's to persuade them to your point of view. If your presentation isn't effective in doing that, it's not worth any of your time. So spending a little extra time to increase the chances of success at achieving the objective you want to achieve with your presentation is probably worth it. Because otherwise, if you're reading your slides and they can't even hear you while you're talking, you don't even need to be there. So just something to think about as you're delivering your presentations. Those are some thoughts I had about presentation delivery. And so once again, what I thought I'd do is pause here and take questions about this, and then I'll talk a little bit about some tools that can make your life easier as you're trying to implement some of these ideas. So I'm happy to take questions about presenting if folks have them. So I will open up my participants screen here again that I've been ignoring, and look for hands if you have questions about the act of presenting your speech, your class, etc. Okay, no questions. I don't know whether to regard that as a good sign or a bad sign. One never knows. Sebastian, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much, Jonathan. I will not put my screen as I am in my bed. I am sorry for that. But that's the time. And but I wanted to ask a few questions. The first one is that I understand very well that it's better to have your face. The trouble we have is that we may face some bandwidth issue with people in the other side of the world. Therefore, how we can deal with that? At what moment we decide to go with our face and how we don't go because of the problem of bandwidth. The second question I have, it's I like your suggestion or advice. I am always into trouble when I have to give, for example, and I guess that it's not just me, a presentation, a summary of the finding of one group. And I will take the example of ART-3. When we have to talk about that, we have to talk what we get out of this work after 1 year of work. And it's very difficult to get outside of the wording because we spend, I don't like to have Adigo Bridge link in front of me, sorry. It's difficult to have, to give to the participant to be sure that we give the right wording because we spend time in just using the right words. And it's why it's sometimes a little bit too much word, but I don't see how to get out of that for this specific issue. And I will stop here because if not, I will be too long. Thank you very much, Jonathan.
No problem. Merci, Sebastian. Thank you for your questions, and they're both very good. The first question is about bandwidth. And it's an excellent question, and that topic comes up quite a bit, particularly in our community that is spread so far around the world. And there are a couple of things that I would mention. One is that most of the folks with poor bandwidth are in fact switching over to Adigo and listening and then following along with the presentation and not trying to get into Zoom at all. So the number of people who are trying to do Zoom but have limited bandwidth is not a great number. The other is that we used cameras quite a bit during ICANN 68. We didn't use them at all during ICANN 67, but they were used for a number of sessions in ICANN 68, and there weren't a lot of reported difficulties when they polled the participants in seeing what was on the screen. So that suggests that people that are in Zoom in the first place are having sufficient bandwidth to deal with the visuals. Now, one of the things that can increase the difficulty of that is if everyone has their camera on. So if you have a session where it's a presentation like this one, then it makes sense for most people to have their camera off and only the presenter to turn their camera on. You'll see now that when the board and others are giving presentations, that's what they do. You're more often than not, you're looking at their avatar if they're not speaking, and they only turn on the camera of the person who's speaking. So that's one of the things that can be done to save bandwidth is to only have one video feed at a time coming across the wire, because of the way Zoom is designed, they're all sent as separate video streams, and that can cause some bandwidth issues. The third thing that I'll bring up again is that Zoom has a wonderful feature, which is the ability to stream your meetings to YouTube. And one of the nice things about streaming a meeting to YouTube is that all that complexity of screen sharing, multiple video feeds, etc., are turned into one single video feed and sent to a service like YouTube that's set up more for more effective streaming. And so if we can move in a direction of streaming our meetings to the at-large YouTube channel or the ICANN YouTube channel, so that those with lower bandwidth are able to just simply watch a video feed rather than having to get all the multiple things that are coming over Zoom, I think that would make their lives easier as well. So that's something that we continue to push the meetings staff to implement, because it's a feature of Zoom to be able to do that. And YouTube has spent many, many years allowing for much more efficient transmission of data, caching of data in local regions, et cetera, that would help a great deal with the bandwidth issue. Your second question had to do with text-heavy documents, and that is definitely a challenge for presentations inside the ICANN community. But the fact that it's a challenge doesn't change the fact that having text on the screen and talking at the same time is not effective. So while we need an answer to that question, the answer isn't to put text on the screen and then read it to the audience. You have to choose one or the other. You could put text on the screen and then just be quiet for a while and give everyone the opportunity to read the text. Perhaps the interpreters are reading the text to those that are on the language bridges, but you talking about the text while people are attempting to read it doesn't work. So while it is a challenge for us, we need to decide to either explain that language and those language choices verbally, and more often than not, it's a word or two that are really the ones we want to focus on when we're talking about specific language. But if it's true that we really need the audience to read something in order to understand it, then what that suggests is put it up on the screen and then give them a moment to do that and stop talking while your audience is trying to read the text that's on the screen. I hope that's helpful. Sebastian, is that a quick follow-up?
Yes, thank you, Jonathan.
Yeah.
Please, I understand your proposal, but one of the problem we have is a language issue, and I know that we have some interpretation, but it's not the same thing to read a text in English, to listen a text in English, and to listen a translation of somebody who speak. So the problem is that if we do that, we don't have any more interpretation. If we don't, if I put a screen with a text and I stop to talk, we don't have interpretation anymore. Therefore, it's not so easy that as you described. I understand we need to find a way, but I am not sure that it's the best. We need to find out a best way to do it. But I'm not sure with what you say.
Right, we do need to find a way, but I can say definitively, the answer is not to read while people are, not to speak while people are reading. Whatever the answer may be, that's not the answer. So the fact that we don't have the perfect answer yet doesn't make that the answer. It's still not the answer, because all it does is make it more annoying for people to try and read the text that's on the screen. It's not effective for that purpose. So we need to find a way around that, whether it's giving the interpreters the text in advance that you're going to want them to read, and I've done that in previous presentations, or it's just speaking to it and letting that be translated. But speaking while they're reading doesn't work. It's just literally the case that it does not work, so that's not the answer. Thanks, Sebastian. Marita, go ahead, please. You might be on mute, Marita. There you go.
Hey, I was so proud of myself. I followed your advice and turned the video on when I was speaking.
Thank you.
Bandwidth is also something that worries me. So I guess that's a good way of getting around it. Just turn it on and off and doing that. One of my dilemmas with all of this, I spent quite a lot of time teaching and using PowerPoint teaching, and that those PowerPoints then had to be background material for people who had to be able to go back to that when they were studying. So the slides had to have enough information so that they could just go back to it. They didn't have the audio. And I still kind of feel like we have to have enough information on the slides so people can go back to it, see the slides, and know kind of the basics of what you're talking about. Is that what you're saying here? Or sometimes I get the impression that you think we should maybe just have some nice snap, crackle, and pop on the actual slides, and then just speak to it. And if someone went back to the slides, it wouldn't really be needed.
Yeah, thanks, Marita. And it's a good question. And I guess I'll reiterate, I don't think your slides are a good record of your presentation. I believe if they are, then your slides are poorly designed. In other words, your slides need to be an accessory to your presentation. And so what we end up doing very often, because we're trying to have the slides do double duty, is we create what's in the industry called a slideument, which isn't quite a presentation and it's not quite a document. It's like a poor version of both of those. So there's a couple of alternatives to that. One is to use the notes section of the PowerPoint presentation to provide the text that you want people to go to and be able to refer back to so that they can see the slide content and the text at the same time when they're reviewing that. And so it's the handout version could be what we make available as a PDF. The other option is to simply create a document that's an actual document rather than a slideument that you do in Word or something like that, and put that on there on the wiki as a separate thing for people to see. I know it seems like extra work, but I come back to the idea that if we're not using slides to design our presentations, we don't build them in PowerPoint. People don't pull up PowerPoint in order to give a presentation unless they intend to use slides. And so that leads us to misuse PowerPoint as like our note-taking tool, and that's not what it is, right? Everybody wants to blame PowerPoint for PowerPoint purgatory, but the truth of the matter is we need to think of our presentation and our slides as two separate things, and there's different ways to make that available, either using the notes section or just to create a legitimate document that would accompany your presentation. That'd be my recommendation. Still muted, maybe, Marita, if you're talking.
Thanks, Jonathan. That's helpful. It all takes a lot of practice to learn to do these things. And hopefully, well, I don't know if I'm hoping we'll have to use Zoom long enough to really get good at it.
Well, but we use Zoom even outside the context of the pandemic, right? We use it for everything in between. And so all those presentations are better served by keeping your visuals and your discussion separate. And so thinking about ways to do that. I know at one point you said to me, I'm not a visual person. And, but again, it's not about that. It's about the audience's ability to perceive what it is you're trying to get across. And the wrong slides, either too many words or too much visual complexity, means they are not hearing what you're saying. And so that's defeating your own purpose. And so we need to find alternatives, even though it can be a little bit frustrating when you're first starting out. Thanks, Marita. Greg Shatton.
Thanks, it's Greg Shatton for the record, and I'll turn my video on as well. Give you a look at my COVID appearance. Didn't find a purple shirt or anything like that. But in any case, following up on what the what the discussion just was, sometimes I find it helpful to, when I'm just going along, to actually create that dreaded slideument as my working document, but then to slide, so to speak, all of the detailed text down into the speaker notes or into an entirely different document as a handout that can go along with the document, maybe even have a little bit of a separate life in the continuing legal education context, you actually have to have a separate written document in order to qualify. And if your slides are horrible enough, they will qualify on their own. But that's not the goal. In terms of what should be on the slides, I find it helpful to put in things that may help jog the memory of people looking, key points, maybe some things from the very highest level of your outline, but also maybe a key takeaway or a pull quote or the like. You want something that will kind of help organize the mind and help organize your listener around what you're saying, but that won't distract and that won't cause you to tell the same story twice, once with your slides and once when you're talking at the same time. Jonathan, you've gotten very blurry. And that's much better. So I think that's the same thing too with distracting graphics and also transitions. There's a lot of fun transitions in PowerPoint. You can get carried away with them. Don't. Adding some simple transitions or maybe the same simple transition all the way through can add a little bit of visual interest, but don't do a different transition for each page. You look like a 12-year-old. And kind of lastly, in terms of using graphics, there's a lot of cheesy clip art out there. It just tends to look like cheesy clip art after a while. I think we've hopefully gotten over it by now. And while you did say that using complex, flow charts and graphs and the like can be distracting, I think that if you can find a simple organizer, and there are quite a number of them in PowerPoint, that again shows the story that you're telling, that there's a show aspect to it, like a flow chart of this, then this, then this, that just organizes 3 simple words, preparation, plan, action, whatever it is, or in my case, action, plan, preparation. So something like that you can have up there. You can use something that catches the eye, because straight text, no matter how little of it, is still inherently dull. And it's nice to have something when the visuals are there to do something with them more than just black on white.
Definitely. Thanks, Greg. Those are great suggestions. I will say that most presentation professionals, say like Duarte, the company that designed Al Gore's slides for An Inconvenient Truth, have a rule of thumb of no more than 6 words per slide. That's how aggressive the people that do this for a living are about limiting the amount of text that's on there. So yes, sometimes there might be a pull quote, but even if you're doing something like a timeline or a progression or a staircase diagram, there's a lot of valuable visuals that are built into PowerPoint that you can use. I still recommend creating a build slide, which is very different than creating page flip transitions between your slides. Don't do that, but you can set up those visuals so that they appear a bit at a time, so that again, you're controlling and leading the audience through the thing that you're trying to show them. If you show them a diagram all at once, they're most often not going to be where you want them to be in that diagram when you're talking about it. And so the extent to which you can be the one that kind of controls what it is they're seeing, the better off you're going to be in terms of your audience having understanding.
I agree with that. That's a great point, and that's something that is used very little by most ICANN related presenters, is the building slide. And it takes a little bit of extra work up front, and you also have to remember that it's there. And if somebody else is running your slides, then that can be quite difficult. That's a one caution against using the building slide, unless it's just a couple of quick builds.
Right. If it's a PDF or something, then it's not going to be there either.
Yes,
so there is one of the, again, what I showed you in the Gantt chart is you don't even need to use the complex features of PowerPoint. You could just have a white box that you just move along the image as you go if you want to reveal part of it. Brixton, please.
Yes, good afternoon or morning or evening or night, wherever you are. I was thinking about what Sebastian said, and well, one thing, maybe it's crazy, I thought maybe if it's possible to have the slides translated so whoever doesn't understand the language that is being spoken to have the translation through interpreter and to see the slides in the language they understand. I think it would be very complex if not enough time to have the slides translated, but maybe it could help for people who doesn't understanding enough the main language. That's a proposal I have. And something I wanted to ask you, I wrote in the chat, but I see more attention to ask than the chat, is that what tool do you use that could better help you make contrast between the text and the background? And if you have seen a tool, something that will help people who are, I think, afraid also as that daltonic. What tool? Because yeah, I see most presentation and I kind of some other places are black letters on white black backgrounds, but sometimes you may need or may want to have some colors, and you don't want after you make it like a
Thanks, Rick.
presentation.
Yeah, I'm gonna cut you off because we're running a little bit long. So what I showed early in the presentation is a website called colorsafe.co that you can go to that will help you to figure out what your color combinations and fonts and typefaces will look like, and that what make them most easy to see. The W3C has actually created guidelines for contrast ratios that are sort of minimums for accessibility, and colorsafe.co follows those contrast guidelines from the W3C and only gives you choices that adhere to those guidelines. So that's a good place to start in trying to create presentations that are easier to see. So like last time, we got a graphic from ICANN that was sort of an off blue color. You can put that color into colorsafe.co and it'll make recommendations for what you want to use as other colors and to still be able to see on bad monitors or as we all have somewhat deteriorating vision as well. So colorsafe.co. I guess we've gone a little bit longer here all of a sudden. Do I still have the ability, Claudia, to keep the interpreters for a few more minutes? I don't know what, I don't want to be abusive.
Hi, Jonathan. This call is actually scheduled for 90 minutes, so you have 25
Oh,
minutes.
Excellent. All right. I thought it was only 60 minutes. The next thing that I wanted to talk a little bit about is some tools that can make your life a little bit more easy in trying to give a dynamic presentation like we've been discussing. Unfortunately, in Zoom, there is a pause share function, but that pause share doesn't take you back to your picture. It creates a freeze frame of the thing that you were sharing so that you could advance your slides without it showing up on the screen. And so it's not particularly useful for our purposes. So for my presentation, what I was doing was stopping the share and restarting it as I wanted to go back and forth between me and the things that I wanted to show, whether it was a video or a PowerPoint or other tools like that. And so that can get a little bit frustrating over time, and it requires a lot of clicking around to make your transitions. And I can see how that could end up being frustrating. So what a lot of people are using is what's known as virtual camera software. And so this is software that interposes itself between the actual camera and Zoom, and then shows up to Zoom as if it's a camera. So it's a software generated camera, if you will. And what that allows you to do is create more complex visuals, like put text over the video or share a screen, etc., and to be able to make very quick transitions between these setups. They usually call them scenes on your camera. So there are a number of tools like this that are out there. I would say that perhaps one of the best commercial products that's available for doing this is called ManyCam. And again, I will put a link to that. I can put it in the chat as well. I turned off my chat and don't any longer see how to add it again. But I will put that into the chat. Here it is. ManyCam is a commercial product, and it's one of the best things out there. It does cost some money, but not a lot of money. Because I knew I was going to be giving this presentation and making this recommendation, I did reach out to them, and they gave me a code for a 20% discount. So this is the name of my company. So if you use the code RhetorCorp, then you can use the get a 20% discount on ManyCam. Eduardo, you asked about OBS, and OBS is software designed for doing a whole lot more. One of the things it's capable of doing is a virtual camera, and it is free, but it's a lot to take in. So I wouldn't recommend anybody just pick up OBS if they want to start playing around with virtual cameras, but it's very powerful software and allows you to do a great many things. And people that are doing things like streaming church services and concerts and things like that are making good use of OBS and other sort of high-end streaming tools. What I want to do is introduce you to a free tool that's called SplitCam. It's available for both Windows and for Macintosh. And so I'm going to bring it up here, hopefully. Let's see. So if I can, I'm going to share my screen and share SplitCam. And so this is a little bit how SplitCam looks. And what you'll see along the left-hand side here are scenes that you've created. So rather than to have to share or not share and to go back and forth, I can literally just change between the scenes that I want to have. I think I closed my presentation, which was dumb in retrospect. Let me see if I can just, I'm always trying to clear the desktop, and I got a little bit more too aggressive doing that than I should have here. So bear with me for a second. I will see if I can get back into my presentation and one of the interesting features of PowerPoint and now Keynote as well is that you don't have to have your presentation take the entire screen. It can be done in a window, which makes sharing it a lot easier than when it takes over the entire screen. So if we look at this, I'm looking at my camera feed now. I can click over here, and I can say that I want to add something that is a slide, a window share. And I'm going to say that the window I want to share is PowerPoint. So there is my PowerPoint presentation done as a share. If I then switch back to here, I am back to my video feed as well. I can click back and forth between my presentation, and while I'm on my presentation, I can go ahead and advance the slides, and you'll see that they advance fine. You're seeing that actually through the camera.
By the summer of 1861.
Sorry. You're seeing that through the camera rather than through a shared screen. So that means you don't even need to be a host of the Zoom meeting in order to use this functionality. All you need is for people to maximize your video window, and you can easily switch then back and forth between your camera and the things that you want to show. So over on the left-hand side, you can see you can add a number of things you want. You can put in different windows that you want to share. You can share a video. You can also overlay graphics, for example. So one of the things I could do if I wanted to is on the window that is my camera feed, I can add a share window, and I'll go ahead and add the PowerPoint slideshow. And I have the ability then to resize this window and actually make it part of my video feed. So I can, again, if I come down to my slides here, you'll see that as I advance my slides, they're advancing in this little pop-up window that I have put on the screen. The other thing I can do is if I'm on my slide presentation, I can go ahead and add my web camera, which is here. And I can resize that so that, for example, what I'm doing is keeping myself on the screen while I'm showing my PowerPoint. So my PowerPoints are in the background. And again, if I'm in PowerPoint and I advance them, you'll see that they're advanced in the camera feed that you're looking at, and not just in the screen share. So right now I'm sharing a screen so that you can see this interface. But if I stop the share, you'll see that my camera is the one that's showing this information from SplitCam. It's not because of the screen share, it's actually in the camera itself. So you can see that my video is there and that the slides are there as well. So, and so then the beauty of that obviously is that I can very easily switch back and forth between me with my slides up on the corner or these slides with me in the corner. And I have a lot more flexibility in terms of what I'd like to do. I can put lower thirds or other graphics. If I was feeling really crazy, I could, over the video feed, I could actually put a graph that just was transparent in the background and sort of point to things on the graph as it, you know, sales have gone up, et cetera. And I can impose those things on top of the camera feed. So when you add something, you can see here, hopefully, these are all the things that you can add: a web camera, an IP camera, your browser. You can share a game, because this is where all this technology started, is for people that are streaming their games. And you can add images, video, a slideshow, et cetera, or just text. So if I wanted to, I can have text in here that that I can, again, move somewhere on the screen to sort of build out what this scene looks like, and then very easily switch between these different scenes so that I don't have to stop my share a different window. So when I wanted to share color space, for example, I could just make that another one of these scenes. So if I'm in here and I say colorsafe.co, and I create a third scene down here, and I say I want to add a window share, I can say that I want to add the ColorSafe browser window. And so there is ColorSafe. And again, now with a click, I'm just switching between these. I can load these into hotkeys. I can use the mouse, as I'm doing right now, for demonstration purposes. But I can very quickly move between these different perspectives. And this is all just coming across my camera feed that gives me a lot of flexibility. So Zoom has the ability, if I stop this share and I share the Zoom window, which is somewhere, let me see if I can, I have to make that big again. So if I take this and I share this screen, And where is Zoom? So Zoom should be showing up, but of course it's not. I don't know why. But if I share the whole screen, I guess you'll see it. So that if I look at my Zoom window, which is, let me stop sharing maybe for a second. If I want to, I could say that, I'm trying to find the easiest way to show this to you quickly. Sorry about that. If I share a window, and the window I want to share is the Zoom meeting. So you can see, if I'm looking at the Zoom interface now, over my camera, you'll notice over here under video that there's a list of different cameras that are available, one of which is my webcam, the Logitech Brio, but the split cam video driver is the one that's actually driving my video. So throughout this entire meeting, my video was actually getting filtered through split cam so that it would make it easy for me to make this transition later on. But you can see that this tool is very powerful in allowing you to mix video, your video feed, videos, graphics, slides, etc., into the same presentation, and it all just simply goes over your camera feed. One of the things that is true, though, is that not all online software supports virtual cameras. They all will eventually, but they go in and out of supporting it sometimes. And so if you have to, when you minimize the split cam software, it actually creates a preview window. And so if you need to, you can also just share a screen in Zoom and share that preview window and get the same effect, which is basically using share screen, but now the screen I'm sharing is the split screen window. So that is the use of a virtual camera. For those of you that are interested in what I did during ICANN 68, I guess that was the last one, is that I went ahead and I put up an avatar for myself so that while I was talking, etc., it was picking up different things that I was doing. And so if you are trying to hide from your audience, for example, you could also go ahead and change your camera to an avatar if you want to, and participate from there as well. So you have a lot of options that you can do once you start playing with virtual cameras. So that's a little bit of an ad hoc demo of a virtual camera. I guess I can show you other stuff, but don't know what the best things are to show you. So what I may do is, once again, open it up for questions if you have them about what it's like making use of a virtual camera. So let me hide the chat and see if there are hands open, and there are. So Vixen, go ahead. Vixen, is that an old hand?
No, yeah, I think I didn't.
Okay, so Judith, go ahead.
Thanks. So I thought it was interesting. Under virtual camera, can you split the screen in half, or does it have to be a small, one thing big and the other thing small?
You can do any of those things. So you can certainly split the screen in half if you want to, because you have the capacity to resize all of the things that you're placing on that surface when you construct that scene. So you could create a split screen kind of image if you wanted to. The difficulty you might face is that the video feed that's coming in is 16 by 9. So 16 by 9 screen won't fit two 16 by 9 screens perfectly well, but you can certainly do it if you want to do a split screen.
Yeah, because that's what they say, people are saying in other presentations I've seen, is that you should give half to your face and half to the PowerPoint so that both are equal. And people don't lose focus. That's what I heard.
Yeah, so I don't recommend that. I think it should just be one or the other more often than not. But you can do split screen if you want to inside of inside of things like Splits Cam or Manycam. Thanks for the question, Jose. I can't hear you, but you don't seem to be muted, Jose. You might have your microphone physically muted or something.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Okay. No, I'm asking if once you have your use one of these tools to make a virtual camera, you can also redirect that virtual camera and record all the information. In that case, let's say that you have a noisy room. We are in a COVID environment where we don't have a studio, and we have a street noise and all the ambient noise. And if you record it, you can cut those interruptions. Also, you can rehearse recording the clips directly to a video file, edit, and then when you do your presentation, then you can put your clips. That's the way I'm doing it. What do you think about that?
I think it's great. I think all I really wanted to accomplish with this webinar was to get people thinking a little bit outside the box from what we've been doing to date in terms of how they do their presentations. So one of the ways that you could conceivably be more present on the screen is actually to embed videos of yourself into your PowerPoints. And then as you navigated through your PowerPoints, you could get to where you wanted to be facing the audience, and you could do that all through your camera, and then just turn your real camera on for question and answer, for example. That's a lot of upfront work to do that, but there is a guy that as an experiment pre-recorded all of his interventions in his business meetings for a week. And so literally everything that he said in online Zoom meetings at work for a week were pre-recorded, and no one was the wiser. So there's a lot of interesting things that you can do when you make use of virtual camera software. So I say experiment, play around with it, but bottom line, keep it simple. Create one camera that's your video feed and another camera that's your, one scene that's your video feed, one scene that's your PowerPoint, and easily switch back and forth. That's what I would most highly recommend doing as you're just trying to figure out how to, manage that back and forth between things. It was pretty rough when I was doing it because I was trying to stay in Zoom to show doing it there, but it's really not ideal doing it that way because you have to stop, share, and reshare. And with a virtual camera, you don't need to do any of that. You can just switch between your scenes. Marita, go ahead.
Yeah, hi, Jonathan. You're working with Microsoft PowerPoint most of the time. Do you ever work with open source? Like I use OpenOffice. Presentation is software that's not as powerful. Do you ever work around that and see if you need?
So thanks, Marita. A question is about open source alternatives to PowerPoint. And there are a number of them. They're not all open source, but there's free alternatives. So there's an open source one that's called OpenOffice, and there's Google Slides that you can use. There's Canva that you can use to do your presentations, and they would all work essentially the same way, which is just sharing that window. And most of them have all the functionality you could possibly want, because for an effective presentation, more often than not in PowerPoint or Keynote, you're using 2% of the functionality that they're providing. You don't need to do fancy transitions or anything like that. And all the things that I demonstrated in PowerPoint, whether it's revealing part of an image or building out a graphic over time, are available in things like OpenOffice, Google Slides, and other free alternatives. So that shouldn't dissuade you from, breaking up your complex graphics, for example, into pieces or revealing them a little bit at a time. At the worst case, you can create a series of slides that have more and more information as you go, and create a build slide that way. So there's definitely solutions in almost any package that you might be using.
Oh, that's good to know. Thank you. I always thought that maybe OpenOffice was a little less workable than.
It's a little less workable, but it's not enough less workable that it will have any impact on anything we're trying to do, right? I mean, there's so many features crammed into PowerPoint now. Like it'll let you review your timings. It'll suggest accessibility changes you might want to make to your slides. There's all kinds of things that they keep adding to PowerPoint that may not be added to OpenOffice as quickly, but really we're not trying to overcomplicate the slides themselves. All we're trying to do is make them simpler, more straightforward, and then when we need to show a lot of information on a slide, show it a little bit at a time so that we're leading somebody through the image. And you can certainly do all of that in any of these free tools.
We can't hear you.
Cannot hear you.
Thank you. I've been just getting in the habit of hitting mute just in case the speaker caused feedback, but I guess it hasn't been anyway. But anyways, I'm interested if there's any other questions. Oh, I see that Vrixen has a question as well. Go ahead, Vrixen.
I was thinking this. Is it possible to use, I don't know, a split cam or something else to create like a background so that you don't have a background that like the ones that are sold in Amazon or anywhere else, but do you create your own background and you put it like a background picture or whatever, and say, change the scenery?
Sure, that's a good question. A lot of people have been having a lot of fun with backgrounds in Zoom, and in fact, they've only become more powerful now. So if I want to, I can jump in and actually make my PowerPoints my background and sort of simulate the thing that I'm talking about. In other words, I can have load my PowerPoints into Zoom and advance the slides from within Zoom and have my picture sitting on top of the slides if I want to. The difficulty again though is that like the PDF, you're going to lose at least at this point, lose all of the dynamic functionality that you have in those slides. The builds in particular will be lost if you do it that way. And they don't make it particularly easy in Zoom to switch between the things that you're trying to do. So it becomes a little bit more difficult to do some of the things that you might want to do inside of Zoom alone. But they're clearly paying attention and they're trying to find interesting things and make it allow you to do more interesting things with your Zoom meetings, etc. But I feel like the things like split cam are still a better way to go today because Zoom hasn't really gotten their mind around how to integrate you with your underlying presentation in the same way that virtual cameras does.
Is there a free tool like you can use to create like something like a green screen, you know,
Yeah.
something like
So
that. You move, and if you move your arm or your face, it doesn't do like a robotic movement.
right. I mean, one of the challenges is that if you are trying to swap out the background, you're really going to be better off if you use a green screen instead of using the built-in sort of faking it technology that's in Zoom now. It's using the depth camera to try and separate you from the background. And it's amazing what a good job it does, but we've all seen what that looks like. Like if I move a little bit, my arm disappears because it's not in the same focal plane anymore. And so I don't make a big recommendation to create a simulated green screen effect. If you really want to replace the background behind you, then put a green screen behind you, and then both Zoom and any of these other tools can do a better job of cutting you out from the background, and you don't have to worry about moving and having parts of your body disappear and things like that. So if you want to change the background, it's okay. Again, I would suggest not making an overly complex background because what you want to do is have people focused on what you're saying and not on the fact that you're on the bridge of the Millennium Falcon or something like that. But if you want to do it, I would suggest using a green screen. There's another thing in my research for clients that I came across that's called a web around, which is an innovative, and I don't know if it's where it's available and where it isn't available, but the web around is a very innovative green screen that's like a pop-up that'll actually attaches to your chair. So instead of having a huge green screen behind you or something like that, you can have this little green screen that just attaches to your chair. So check that out as well if you're interested. It looks like I just wrote it to Claudia and not to everyone. But it looks like we've run out of time, so I will pass the baton back to Claudia for this survey, and feel free to reach out to me with questions if you have them as you're processing this information. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Thank you very much, Jonathan. If everyone can please complete the survey that is on your screen now. The first question is, how did you learn about this webinar? We have a few choices: Twitter, Facebook, the at-large mailing list, the at-large calendar, Skype, or from a colleague. The next question is, what region are you living in now? The third question is, how did you feel about the timing of the webinar, which is 1900 UTC? The fourth is, did the webinar duration allow sufficient time for questions? The fifth question is, was the presentation interesting? And I learned something from this webinar. And the final question is, I would like to participate in other at-large webinars. Thank you all very much for participating. And when you are finished and this call is over, we will end the recording. And thank you all very much for joining, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Jonathan, for the great job you did.
Here. Excellent. Thanks, JZ.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, and bye for now.